So, this was a pretty difficult episode to write. Not because I couldn't find a good topic to focus on, but because I found two different topics, and both of them were so interesting, I actually had a hard time picking. It was tough, but I did finally pick one, and maybe in the future we can circle back to the other at some point. I think for a lot of these episodes, there's been more content to cover than we can actually fit into an episode. So, maybe we can do like revisited episodes or something like that.
Sure. Yeah.
All right, but here goes. So for this episode, we're talking about the word scale. And in the context of business, the word scale refers most often to growth. So when somebody says they want to scale their company, they're usually talking about rapid growth, like trying to increase revenue by 10 times or scale their team from 5 people to 100. But actually, to designers, scale means something kind of similar, but also radically different. In the context of design, scale, simply put, means difference in size. And the difference in size between two elements in a design can communicate different types of information. So to start things off, Miles, I have a quick design thinking experiment that I'd like to put in front of you.
Let's do it.
So if there were a dinosaur and a person in the same composition, how would you want to communicate the difference in scale between the two of them?
The dinosaur would be larger, like just drawn bigger, and then the person smaller? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah,
so when you have a flat canvas and you want to communicate information about depth and how big things are in comparison to each other, you kind of need to just size one thing up or size one thing down or whatever.
Yep.
So yeah, that's how scale works. And of course, I didn't just pick dinosaur and human as my example at random, because today on Work Association, I want to talk about Jurassic Park.
Oh my God, yes. Let's do it.
Welcome to Work Association. I'm Nick.
I'm Miles.
We run a creative agency together, and now we're the hosts of this podcast. Work Association is a show about the intersection between technology, design, and the experience of being a human. It's a word association game Miles and I invented to learn about new and interesting things so we can expand the way we think about the work we do every day as brand storytellers and experience designers. Each week, Miles and I switch off roles. One of us chooses a word for the other to research in the context of design, technology, or branding, then we meet back up and talk about what we found. At the end of each episode, the researcher picks another word that they associate to the story they told, and then we switch off and do it all over again. Okay, so before we can actually talk about Jurassic Park, let's have a quick lesson in how designers think about and analyze their work. Scale, which is also sometimes called proportion, is one of the principles of design, along with contrast, economy, balance, rhythm, and harmony. And by the way, a bit of behind the scenes info here. In doing research for this show, I came across like 50 different lists of design principles with slight variations. Some were as little as like 5 principles, like the Gestalt principles, and some were up to 12. But these were the ones that Miles and I learned in our Design 101 class when we first met in college like 10 years ago. So back to the principles of design. These are the fundamental truths for creating a design composition. They're both tools and also sort of like laws by which design is determined to be effective or quote unquote good. So again, the principles that we use are scale, contrast, economy, balance, rhythm, and harmony. And we're just going to quickly define all of those. So contrast is the juxtaposition of different elements. So things like light and dark color values or rough and smooth textures. This is used to highlight differences in a design composition to create a focal point or increase legibility or something like that. So if you have a rectangle with text on it and the background is a dark gray while the text is a slightly lighter shade of gray, the text is probably going to be hard to read. But if you increase the contrast by making that text white, it will now be very easy to read. So next is economy. This is basically using space appropriately, not cluttering a composition by stuffing too many elements into it. And good economy has just enough visual elements in it to communicate an idea without including details or elements that don't contribute to the story of the composition. Balance kind of is what it sounds like. Balance is achieved when the elements in a composition are arranged to create the impression of equality in weight. So too much stuff on one side of the design and a bunch of empty space on the other makes the design feel off balance. But if you place elements in the composition appropriately, balance can be achieved. Rhythm, then, is the use of design techniques like recurring elements that direct the movement of the eye through the artwork. This is true even for compositions that aren't actually moving. Placing and organizing elements in a composition in certain ways can help lead the eye to a focal area. So, for example, just talking about our own website, right up at the top of the page on the homepage, there are 3 main elements of text that you can see. The first is the main navigation, all the links to the different pages on our site. The second is a little welcome statement that says, "Hello, we're Suits and Sandals, a brand communications agency." And the third is at the bottom of the screen. It says, "Nice to meet you," and there's a strong underline below that text. These 3 areas of content lead your eye from top to bottom, and that text with an underline signals to the visitor that there's more content if you scroll. So using vertical rhythm, we can aid the visitor in navigating the page to more content about our agency. All right, we're almost at the end of the list now. Harmony is essentially making sure that all the parts of a design composition form a cohesive whole. A design can have harmony even if there are visually distinct elements in the composition, as long as they're arranged in a way that uses all of the other design principles. So, like with music, individual notes can take on a new, fuller sound when harmonized together to form a chord. In design, all of the elements should harmonize together to form a composition that feels complete and not, unfinished. Finally, circling back to this episode's word, scale is the relationship between objects in a design in terms of size or quantity. So I know I'm not, the chief creative officer or creative director in Suits and Sandals, but Miles, do you think that that's basically kind of on point?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of like what you said in the beginning, there are so many different principles out there that people have published, like,
Oh, yeah.
Just in general. But I think the classic art school 101 is probably like the Gestalt principles and but the stuff that you just listed, it just takes me back to basically when we first met.
Totally.
That intense classroom.
Right.
Yeah. And you can apply it to a lot of things in your life, but yeah, that's very spot on.
Yeah. And, I think that for anybody who's listening to the show that isn't a designer, kind of knowing that when we're putting together a design, there's some form of rules to it that's not just based on whatever trend is out there on the internet. I think it can be helpful to know. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's kind of the big distinction I always make of why what we do isn't necessarily art. When people kind of blend design and art together, I think there's a real big distinction between the two, because design is this problem-solving exercise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas art is this expression of some emotion of some sort. And while you get to a same kind of visually appealing look at the end, with design, I feel like, there's this very process-oriented type of thing. And with art, it's more like you're freestyling and improvising and things like that. Well, that's not to say there's no process to any artist. I'm not saying that, but I think that's a kind of a big distinction that a lot of people sometimes mix those two words together. But for us, we look at design very much as a problem-solving type of exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I didn't just go through those design principles for no reason, right? This is all contextual information that listeners, will benefit from having as we start to talk about the next thing. So now that we've all just graduated Design 101 together, let's talk about dinosaurs. So Miles, you've seen the original Jurassic Park movie, right?
I have, yes.
Okay. How about the sequels? Any of the ones that came after that one?
Yeah, but I don't I mean, they all kind of are blending in my head as just one massive movie, but
Sure.
I've watched all of them. I'm aware of the story and things like that, but details probably not so much. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, for anyone who hasn't seen the original Jurassic Park, Jurassic Park is the epic 1993 blockbuster film, which was based on a novel of the same name, written by Michael Crichton in 1990. In the movie, quick synopsis here, John Hammond, a wealthy industrialist, creates a theme park on an island in South America off the coast of Costa Rica, where people can literally go on safari amongst actual dinosaurs that have been cloned from dinosaur DNA. A group of scientists have been invited to tour the park before its official opening to certify its safety, so that way the park's investors will sign off on opening to the public. But obviously things don't go quite according to plan. And it's really not too much of a spoiler to say that chaos ensues when the dinosaurs start breaking out of their enclosures. If you haven't seen the movie, I highly recommend you check it out. It's a personal favorite of mine from my childhood, probably one of the best action movies of the 90s. And what we're going to be doing today is talking a little bit about how that movie was made, especially in comparison to some of the sequels.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was pretty excited to sort of learn some of the things that I learned because, I'm not generally the type of person to watch like the making of the movie documentaries and things like that. But there's some really interesting stuff that goes on in this original movie that I think really help to understand the actual design process and how it informs the way that people experience a design. We'll start to unpack that now. So when it comes to the principles of design, especially scale, director Steven Spielberg and cinematographer Dean Cundey made some very specific choices to really emphasize the dynamics between human and dinosaur in the movie. So I found a video on YouTube called Why Jurassic Park Looks Better Than Its Sequels from the channel Films and Stuff, which is all about the scale and framing in the original Jurassic Park movie in comparison to the sequels. It's a pretty interesting video. You can find a link to it in the show notes, and I definitely recommend you check it out. And from this video, there's a lot we can learn about not just design, but also communicating emotion through images from the movie Jurassic Park. Right off the bat, one thing Jurassic Park does differently than a lot of other movies is how it was shot, starting with its aspect ratio. So aspect ratio is basically filmmaker speak for the ratio between the width and the height of the frame of the film. So this is kind of like the dimensions of the canvas on which the movie was painted, so to speak. Most action films are shot in an aspect ratio called cinemascope. The cinemascope aspect ratio is 2.35 to 1, meaning that the frame is 2.35 times wider than it is tall. The original Jurassic Park movie, however, is shot in an aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1. Oh, wow. So in comparison to other action films, it's much taller. This added frame height leaves 24% more vertical space for conveying the enormity of the park and the dinosaurs, especially in comparison to the human characters.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah. I had no idea that this was the case, but when you see the subsequent Jurassic Park films in comparison to the original, like two shots next to each other, it really is much taller, which is really cool because obviously, dinosaurs are super tall. And when you're basing a film around showcasing those dinosaurs, it makes sense to make that kind of decision.
So all all the sequels were not shot in that aspect ratio, you're saying?
As far as I can tell, I'm not sure if like Jurassic Park 2 and 3 were shot in 1.85 to 1. But definitely like the more recent ones like Jurassic World and, the ones with like Chris Pratt and stuff, those are all just standard cinemascope. Yeah. Okay. So one example of, how this aspect ratio change really impacts the film is sort of this iconic scene in the scene where Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler, the two kind of main scientists from the movie, when they first see a Brachiosaurus, which is like a really, really sort of long-necked dinosaur. If you've never seen a picture of one, or if you've never seen the film, kind of looks like, the stereotypical leaf eater type dinosaur. When they first see that Brachiosaurus, both people are kept in the bottom half of the frame. And other than a few trees, the Brachiosaurus takes up pretty much the rest of the screen. And actually, in terms of the economy and balance in this shot, the people take up less than a quarter of the total space in the frame. So they're in the bottom, in the right-hand corner, And pretty much the rest of what you're seeing is just the body of this gigantic dinosaur. And as the scene progresses, and we see more and more of the Brachiosaurus, because really at first you only see its midsection. It kind of pans from the tail up through the midsection. And as it does so, and then you start to see its neck, the people get smaller and smaller in the frame. And at the climax of the scene, we see the Brachiosaurus stand up on its hind legs to get to the leaves at the top of this really tall tree and, taking a bite before it sets back down on all fours.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, the humans are so small that if the movie was shot in CinemaScope, they would literally be cut out of the frame to be able to capture the dinosaur taking a bite of leafy goodness up at the top of that tree.
Wow.
These techniques, in combination with close-ups of facial expressions of the doctors, add to the emotions of awe and wonder that the doctors are feeling at seeing a real live, fully grown dinosaur for the first time. But this is only one way that scale is used to communicate feelings like awe, horror, and power in this film. So in the first half of the film, once the humans get to the park and start interacting with dinosaurs, scale is used to intentionally position humans over dinosaurs, like physically over top of them. When the doctors are seen watching a dinosaur hatch from an egg, the filmmakers use a close-up shot that has human faces dominating the entire frame with a tiny little hatchling emerging from its shell in the bottom half of the frame, taking up less than a quarter of the entire composition. So it's like almost a mirror image of the scene with the Brachiosaurus, except it's the same but in reverse, where, rather than the dinosaurs being, kind of the most prominent thing in the frame, it's the humans. And what the filmmakers are trying to communicate here is the power that the humans have over the creation of life. They're playing God. So Spielberg and Cundy want us to feel that same wonder as Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler, and John Hammond as they're seeing this little baby, emerge from its shell. In the first half of the movie, aside from a few notable scenes, the visitors to the park mostly observe dinosaurs from a distance. Outdoors, wide open spaces, things like that. We see, the full dinosaurs most of the time in the frame, and often both humans and dinosaurs look relatively small because it's captured from very, very extreme wide shots, which capture, like the vastness of the landscape of the park. And again, it adds to the wonder that people are feeling. But, as things start to go wrong, the way humans and dinosaurs are positioned together in the frame also shifts. So settings go from open fields, where humans and dinosaurs are physically distant from each other, to small enclosed spaces, where humans are essentially trapped, and the dinosaurs are right up close to them. In these shots, people take up a pretty standard amount of space in the frame. We're no longer, seeing these like huge human faces with tiny little dinosaurs, or the opposite, with giant, wondrous beasts and like tiny little humans. Instead, we're looking at people as we would experience, standing right next to them. So you see like most of, but, maybe not all of a person's body, their head, their shoulders, maybe down to their midsection. But because the people are taking up that amount of space in the frame, it's as if you're kind of there with the characters, right? You're not watching them from afar. You're in the midst of the action. And as a result, the filmmakers are no longer communicating scale through, this kind of contrast between tiny people and massive dinosaurs, or, massive people and tiny dinosaurs. Instead, we're seeing the dinosaurs from the perspective of the humans. Huge, but right up in your face. And again, things like facial expression, color, and lighting tell this story of horror here, right? It's dark. There's thunder and lightning. People have these like super shocked and scared looks on their face. But all of this is amplified by just how menacing the dinosaurs look from up close. So in one scene, two children are trapped in a Jeep while a T-Rex is stalking around their car, able to smell them inside. And as viewers, our point of view is from within that Jeep right next to the kids, who see this terrifying T-Rex right outside of the vehicle, but you only see bits and pieces of it at a time. When it enters the frame, it's so massive that the only thing we can see through the car window is a single huge eye. And that's
a classic scene.
Yeah, total classic scene. It's terrifying, not just from the sound of the T-Rex roar or the sound of the kid screaming or the darkness pierced by a single flashlight or the rain and the thunder. All of those things are true, but the terror is contextualized by the way scale is used in the scene.
Yeah, it's such a powerful device because, yeah, now that I think about the movie, it does start from this like super cinematic open fields, and it's very kind of utopian almost. Yeah, just like an awesome view of the world. And then as you go into the narrative and progress through the movie, the scale definitely shifts.
Yeah.
And it almost gets claustrophobic in a way because everything is so tight on the camera, and
Right.
you're just like trapped essentially, and
Yeah.
things get tighter and tighter and tighter. But yeah, I mean, scale is such a powerful kind of like narrative device, because you can just through scale tell the entire story, or you are telling the entire story of Jurassic Park. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it adds so much to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Claustrophobic is actually a word that the Films and Stuff video used to describe the second half of the movie. They called it like a horror movie in disguise because when you first
Right.
start watching the movie, it's
Uh-huh.
not like horror or anything like that. It just seems like really interesting action, whatever.
Yeah.
But as things shifts, the tone shifts and the way that the movie is shot also shifts. There's this really interesting thing that they do where, in one scene, two characters are being chased down a hallway by a
Hmm.
velociraptor, and they shoot the shot of the kids or the people running away down this hallway from underneath and between the legs of the velociraptor. So it's
Right.
literally in the frame you're seeing these tiny tiny little people
Hmm.
like being chased by this gigantic monster, and it's only amplified again by the way in which scale of the frame is being used, and it just makes things so much scarier, and it leads to this claustrophobic feeling. It leads to this feeling of being powerless against these monsters and stuff. It's really
Yeah.
interesting.
It's so weird how you can use this same exact technique to both communicate something terrifying and also something like the God moment of just like,
Yeah,
you can like flip the meaning of power depending on what you're showing on screen, but like both using scale.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So Jurassic Park, obviously is a great example of how the principle of scale and other design principles can be used in movies. Through these techniques, filmmakers are able to communicate emotions, ideas without the use of dialogue. And so, that kind of made me think, Miles, can you think of any examples of the ways that you've used things like scale to communicate ideas or emotions within the context of a design?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, so if you go to our website, you'll actually notice that most of our interaction design revolves around scale animations. So on the homepage, the area directly below the fold, so right when you scroll down, you'll notice that the section starts off full width, edge to edge in your browser. Then it actually scales down to snap onto the grid of the site. So this was an intentional decision. It wasn't just to be cool, although it's definitely pretty cool, but it's there so that you get this feeling of content coming into focus, right? So instead of going from one large, expansive section to the next, we can break the experience up and hold the attention of the user in a pretty unique way. Yeah, you recreate this feeling of taking a step back to see the bigger picture kind of thing. And this experience was definitely inspired by that moment when you come across an interesting piece of art in a gallery. So, when you shift your body and take a step back to really see the work. So, that was the emotion and feeling that I really wanted to capture and take place there. Then we also have these hover effects for the featured work thumbnails right below that. The interaction is that when you hover over, the image scales up. So here, the user has already experienced this stepping back motion in the previous section, and now these smaller thumbnails are coming forward at you. And the intention here was to really create an overall depth to the page, all by playing with these scale animations. You now have a sense of being able to move backwards and forwards, right? And the interesting thing is that by making the interaction be triggered by a hover effect, which is a physical thing that a user has to perform to, trigger the animation, you're able to directly connect your user with your content. And, because now there's a sense of being able to actually grab it, right? So, yeah, scale is super powerful because you can add dimension to a flat space and also recreate a physical connection with your content and users. And that's really how, I try to use it throughout our work. It's always kind of a struggle to, have to communicate so many things, right? Like let's say on a website. And scale is really perfect for packing in a lot of information without overwhelming the users. So like make sure the economy of the view that you're looking at is still really good, but also avoiding any type of cluttered experience or anything like that.
Yeah. So to me, the most important thing I think we can learn from, this whole episode and sort of dive on, the design principle of scale. It's not necessarily specific to scale, and, it's not even specific to Jurassic Park either. These are just really great analogies for a very distilled concept I pulled away from the research process. And that is that, just like with a movie, things can fall flat if you're not working hard to properly communicate ideas through visual design.
Mm-hmm.
The Jurassic Park sequels are fine, they're good, but they really just don't live up to the original. The dinosaurs sometimes almost fade into the background amongst the elements and, scenery within a shot. And there's often even equal screen economy given to humans and dinosaurs in a shot, which negates the emotional weight you feel when you're confronted by a massive creature. That whole idea of, this kind of use and juxtaposition of size to kind of like add to the feeling of horror, the feeling of wonder, whatever it is. Like,
yeah,
you just don't feel that as much in the sequels because they aren't playing with scale as much in the shots.
Yeah, it makes me think of now that we're like kind of talking about movies, how in the Lord of the Rings movies, how the hobbits are, how they shoot them and how they represent them, because that's also another one where there's this shift in power and shift in perspective, where the hobbits are at first they're just these like gentle little creatures running around, and then they become the heroes, right? And then like over time they almost start to look like the giants, right? And then they stand next to like Legolas or like some other character and just like, oh wow, Elijah Wood looks so tiny and hilarious compared to like all these other people.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that's an example, I think, of like, obviously the way that they had to shoot that was through forced perspective where, they made in a shot, it looks like two people are standing right next to each other, but they made, one person stand really far away, which makes them look smaller in the screen. And because like, you can't really tell, like kind of like when we were talking about things as part of the Vision episode, it becomes an illusion, right? That makes it seem like they're right next to each other. But if you were actually in the room, they weren't. But, the reason, I guess, at the end of the day that hobbits were chosen as kind of like the hero race in the, Lord of the Rings trilogy, the original books, as well as obviously the movies, was to kind of like use this as an allegory for like the small, meek little guys kind of like being the ones to save the day and stuff.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And, I think Peter Jackson did a really great job of, capturing that essence while still making them feel powerful enough by the end of it. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, like going back to Jurassic Park, narrative and acting aside, the sequels just really aren't as good as the original. And I think at the end of the day, one big reason is because of the fact that they don't make effective use of scale. And it leads you to think, if they did a better job of following some of the techniques that Steven Spielberg had developed for the first movie, maybe using the 1.85 to 1 aspect ratio, maybe, playing with scale a little bit more in framing, they might have been able to capture more of that emotion, and they would have turned out to be better films. All right, so enough about dinosaurs. The time has come to plan for the next episode. And I just wanted to point out that after the last episode was released, I actually heard from a listener who said, it would be helpful if we had a better name for the segment where the lead host for the episode tells the other host what word they're supposed to research next. And actually, even just explaining that right now, I definitely hear how it's pretty cumbersome. So, I mean, we're a branding agency. When we present brand identity concepts to clients, obviously the brand has its own name, the company has its own name, but we'll still name all the different directions because, psychologically, if we say direction 1, direction 2, and direction 3, or whatever they might be, it can come across as like one being the favorite in one way or another, or, number 1 being the most fleshed out or the one that we think is the best. And that's never really the case. So we just kind of assign sort of concept names to each of the, concepts. And I think taking that into account, Miles, I've got a couple of different options for you for what we can name the segment at the end of the show where we set up for the following episode. So I've got 3 different directions in typical fashion of working with a client for you to choose from or refine.
Okay.
And so those 3 directions, I'll go through them right now. We can kind of talk them through, figure out which one we want to stick with. All right. So the first one is called next steps. So next steps, obviously being that part of a presentation at the end, anytime that we present anything to a client, we always go through everything and then we talk about what we're supposed to do next. So oftentimes if it's a website, we'll present some wireframes and next steps will be, showing you some visual design comps or something like that. So for an episode, next steps would be what's the next episode going to be about? So second direction is to name the word that's going to be in the next episode, call it the discovery word. So now we have, instead of next steps, now each word is called the discovery word, and then you go do your discovery. So like that's what we call our research process. So, the discovery word would be whatever the word's going to be, and then, it'll contextualize it that way. And the third direction is just to call it the focus. So it's the focus for the next episode.
Okay.
So those are the 3 options: next steps, the discovery word, or the focus.
So I think I like next steps a lot. I think the focus might be too intense and very serious. Like we're about to go into something very, very serious. The discovery word is awesome, but aesthetically, how it's like hard to say, I think, for me, like discovery word. I don't know. It's a little jumbly. I like the idea of next steps. It feels pretty loose, and it's always a favorite of our clients when we tell them what the next steps are and that we're moving right along. Maybe we could try next steps. What are you leaning towards?
Yeah, so I think similar to you, I would just go ahead and knock focus out of the running and just between next steps and the discovery word, there's kind of pros and cons to each. I agree that next steps feels really solid as like the conclusion of an episode, right? Like it's the end of the episode. We're going to go over next steps. But the thing that's interesting about the discovery word is that you can reference it at any point, right? So talking about what the word is for the episode at the beginning of the episode, it's possible to call it the discovery word. And then you can reference it at the end. You can reference it in the middle. So it's got a little bit more flexibility and usability that way.
Sure.
If it's hard to say, maybe the sort of idea of next steps is really solid and the name for next steps is really solid, but maybe discovery word, the actual naming of it is not super solid, but the idea behind it is, so I don't know, maybe we want to refine the discovery word down, like call it something different. And by the way, everyone who's listening, this is like literally what our creative process is like when we're coming up with brand names, when we're coming up with or not brand names, but when we're coming up with the naming direction for brands, or when we're kind of doing any sort of internal kind of brainstorming or workshopping, this is what our process is like.
Yeah, I think it's not even about actually any type of decision making. I feel like it's like this, where an idea gets presented and then we just lay out what our gut reactions are, right? And then we feed off of each other's reactions and feedback, and then we're like critiquing reactions, and then we run off and try to refine it and then come back with the final thing.
Yeah. And like speaking, just kind of playing off of that, like this sort of back and forth and kind of feeding off each other and stuff.
Yep.
I think based on your feedback and based on like the feedback that I just gave, one thing that we could do, which happens, it actually happens, it happens way more often. And I know, Miles, you probably know what I'm about to say.
Yeah.
But it happens way more often than we should really like to admit. A lot of times when we present more than one direction, there's strong positives for multiple directions. And then we end up kind of going with like almost a new Frankenstein direction where we decide to take positive elements from multiple directions. And what I'm about to say is, maybe we name the end of the show Next Steps, but we also have a name for what the word is, right?
That's what I was just about to say. Yeah. That's classic client move.
Right. So, I mean, if discovery word is cumbersome, we could come up with something else.
Yeah, I think it'll stick. I think it'll stick. We could try it, and it is a good. It's better than, I don't even know what we call it right now. I think we
don't call it anything.
Oh yeah, we don't call it anything.
It's just the word for the next episode.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Well, I guess okay. Let's stick it there. Like we'll call the sort of ending of the show Next Steps. That's the kind of piece where we break away from the actual subject matter of the episode to talk about the following episode. And we can call the word for the subsequent episode the discovery word. And then that'll give us some flexibility there.
Nice.
All right. So next steps time. We're going to go over the discovery word for the next episode. Miles, it's your word, so you'll be responsible for researching it. And the discovery word for next episode is view.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It always feels like I'm about to win a prize. But like hearing the word, it's just endless possibilities. Okay, view.
Yeah.
Like VIEW, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
awesome.
I don't know. I mean, if we're not sticking to spelling, it could be VUE if you really wanted to go in that direction.
No. I like view. Okay. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot with that, obviously.
Sure.
But yeah, I don't know. I think I started to do this thing where I just let the word sit, and as I'm going about my day, I'll associate it with something, and then that's what I'll run with. So yeah, I'm not gonna promise anything or say anything about it right now. All that I will say is, hopefully, I come up with something cool.
Yeah, but, that's probably best, going forward for any future episodes, like not setting any expectations because it's really a waste anyway.
It always comes down. You always make a sharp right, and like it's totally different than what you originally intended.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Nice. All right, Miles, you've got your discovery word, and I guess next steps for you listeners is to, tune into next episode, and we'll see you then. Thanks for listening to Work Association. If you like this episode, please subscribe, tell a friend, and give us a rating or review. The show was produced by Max Bangora and hosted by Miles Rojas and Nick Dank. That's me. Work Association is brought to you by Suits and Sandals, a brand communications and creative agency that helps companies tell better stories and create better digital experiences. To learn more about us, go to suits-sandals.com. That's SUITS-SANDALS.com.